Liz Kueneke's urban fabric project involves embroidering maps of different cities and inviting communities to weave their own narratives into the maps. The project aims to change people's perceptions of place and foster a sense of connection to their surroundings. Liz has conducted these participatory mapping projects in various cities around the world, including Barcelona, Manhattan, Bangalore and Morocco. The maps serve as a platform for people to share their stories, memories and opinions about the city. The slow and interactive nature of embroidery allows for conversations and discussions to unfold, leading to a deeper understanding of the place. Liz's work is influenced by the concept of psychogeography, which explores different ways of experiencing and understanding our environment. And through her art, Liz aims to highlight the layers and stories that exist within a place and encourage people to explore and appreciate their surroundings. So the thing I love about you is I've known of you for over a decade, I want to say, and every time I think, like, when someone wants an idea of what needlework is capable of, I always think about your projects. And I don't know whether it's because, well, I don't know, it's just such a fantastic idea. And I love the way that you invite communities to weave their own narratives. I think I feel like yours is the kind of project that everybody who cares about where they live should do. Mm. And I'm interested to know, I mean, I think if people aren't aware of you, hi, Liz, nice to have you here, then it would be good to talk about your work, if you can explain the work that you do. And then I've got a few questions to kind of ping off the back of that. But sure. Yeah, go for it. Tell us about Urban Fabric.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, also, I'm super happy to meet you as well, because I've just been like anytime I'm interested in looking for new stitching things, I know that you're the place to go. So
cool.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're the reference, I think. Totally. And yeah, so the Urban Fabric, it's a project that I started, I think it was in 2008. Where basically I embroider maps of different places, different cities usually. And then I take the map on an embroidery table out to public spaces. So in the public square, in the street. And I ask people questions, and they embroider into the map answers to these questions about how they feel about the city, their memories of the city, places that are positive, places that can be changed. Yeah, so it's kind of a way of talking about a place that's fun. And I had worked a little bit with participatory mapping before. I'm quite interested in urban planning and all of these things. And I'd kind of used stickers before, et cetera, people to mark a place on a map with a sticker. But in reality, that's just way too fast. Like, I love the slowness of embroidery. I love that people have to sit there for a while, figure out how to thread the needle, how to embroider. Maybe they've never done it before. And then that's the time that they can chat with people. And then that's where conversations really get going about what's happened on this certain street corner before, or just like, even people not arguing, but yeah, sometimes they argue too, but having disagreements about, what should be done with a certain place, how can it be improved, things like that. Or maybe even like they start to understand a place in a new way because the person next to them embroidering there is like, wow, this is where I fell in love, And then people are like, oh, I thought it was just as a street corner where people that smells like this, Yeah. So really to kind of change people's idea about place and to feel connected to it.
It's so true what you just said there. I hadn't really clocked that after all this time. But yeah, somebody can do a map and can stick a sticker on it, and that's one thing. But the fact that, like you say, they're going to be there, 5 minutes minimum, and that does give you that opportunity. And also, I guess, for people who don't know how to stitch, it makes them vulnerable, which unlocks a whole nother thing as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some people know how to stitch and they love to show off their, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's always some curiosity from some people. They're the ones who approach and kind of say like, what are you doing here? Some people don't even want to look at you because they think maybe you're selling something, so they just walk on by. And yeah, then in different countries, it's a little bit different. Obviously, in some countries, I stick out, I have blonde hair, whatever. So that causes a little bit, maybe more curiosity in some cases. Yeah, and then there are different approaches to public space as well, I guess. Like in Spain, a lot happens outside, a lot happens in the street. And people are also used to talking to people they don't know out in the streets. So there's like quite a familiarity. New York as well, actually. I think New Yorkers have this reputation for being kind of mean and rude, but actually they just speak to anyone about anything. They are super talkative, and I loved it. So.
In New York, would you run the risk of it feeling, I don't know if hipsters are a thing anymore, actually, I haven't really been paying attention, but do you think it would be, there'd be a layer of novelty on it in that kind of way where people would be like, oh, this must be a groovy thing happening?
I suppose so. I don't really know if hipsters exist anymore either. Also, I've been doing this for a while. Maybe it was before the hipsters that I was in New York.
Maybe you started the hipster thing. We did a map of Brooklyn. It had needlework on it. Some guy with a big beard went, hey, I like the look of that. Couldn't smile. It's being a hipster. Because, you know, I did a psychosocial studies degree, which is a blend of psychology and sociology. And so lots of the stuff that you've done, you know, the way we tell the stories about where we live and the mapping out, I think it's always been of real interest to me, because I think we have these narratives. And what I love is, you know, you can have topography, you can have maps that are made that very much show the place. But I just loved that you were allowing this different perspective on it. So are you able, like, can you think of some of the stories that you've been told that really kind of give that different, like you said about the place, probably not the best example, but the one that smells a bit of piss, you know, you're not going to get that on an ordnance survey. And I just wonder if you've got other examples that really stick out as being, you know, exemplars.
Gosh, I mean, yeah, I've heard all kinds of things. You know, I had back in Fez, this was 14 years ago, in Morocco. You know, I had a guy talking about how his grandmother was living in the desert in a tribe, and she was kidnapped and then brought to Fez and then became the richest woman in Fez. And just wild things, you know, really wild things. And then also very like humble stories, you know, also in Fez. It's a place with a lot of artisans. And so you have the people who make the metal teapots. So he was embroidering his little teapot and a little glass of mint tea, right? Because people are marking often places in the map, but then also I often invite them to just do something that is something that they relate to the city. So something that's emblematic for them or to something important to them. So like in Barcelona, the neighborhood I was in, it was, yeah, some of the kids were a little bit tough, you know, and like the first day they were kind of coming up to me like, what is this? You know, haha. And they're like, I'm going to cut your map. And I was like, no, you're not. You're going to embroider with me. And they ended up embroidering with me.
Excellent.
All these teenage boys, but what they wanted to embroider was actually like the tags that they are using for graffiti on the walls of the city. So I think everyone has a way in because everybody wants to tell their story somehow, you know?
Yeah. And then, I mean, because that was another question I was going to ask, when you invite people to stitch, as you say, do they stitch icons? Do you let them stitch whatever they want? Do you do like color coding based on the sort of thing that they're going to stitch?
Yeah, so I have a certain amount of questions that I choose ahead of time, usually with people who live there, to talk about issues that are relevant to their city. So there are questions that are color coded and each have a specific symbol. But then around the edges, I just invite people to embroider whatever they want.
Yeah, and I suppose because as you say, some people will be familiar to it, some people won't. How much tuition do you give people? Or, I mean, do you let them fight it through? Do you let them spend an hour stitching it if they need to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll help as much as they want me to. I end up threading some people's needles for sure, and sometimes even stitch for them. You know, there are people who can't see very well anymore, some elderly people, or yeah, people who are handicapped even, you know, who want to participate, but they can't quite reach where they're trying to get, you know. So I'll help out however much people want me to.
Hmm. And then what, you sit out for what, a couple of days, or do you sit out until you feel the map is done, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's dependent on the place. I mean, in Ibiza, where I live, I have a map of the island that I just took out for a few years
Right.
until 1,001 people had participated.
Wow. Yeah.
But obviously, in other places, you know, I couldn't stay for years in Bangalore, so I was there for a month, you know, and I would go out for various days until I felt it was finished. Yeah.
Hmm.
But it
And
could be infinite. It could go on
yeah,
forever.
yeah,
Each
yeah.
map could fill up forever, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's a question of where the cutoff point is, where you choose to present the thing, like where it becomes like passive, I suppose, to active. Are the maps? So, say with the Bangalore project, then what was the intention of the map?
I mean, with all of the maps, I'm trying to find actually what is common in all of the places. Like, what does everyone want for their city?
Hmm.
You know, like, and there are things like everyone wants more green spaces, everybody wants safe places. But yeah, for example, in Bangalore, I was working with a group of female art students, and they were also focused on the theme of gender in the public space. Um, so we were also asking some questions about that. Where do women feel safe alone? Where do they feel
Hmm.
safe with others, etc.
Hmm. And then are you capturing the narrative as well somehow when you're doing it, or do you just take notes, or do you try and remember it, or?
Yeah, usually I videotape people talking about the why of what they've marked. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
because I just think, I mean, it's just so, yeah, I just find it endlessly fascinating. Like, I'm interested in infographics. Basically, that's what you do in there, isn't it? And it's just near where we live, there's a village called Shavington, and my daughter goes and does ballet lessons there, and they've got a little map from like 1985, I think it is. It's largely cross stitched, but it's still got that
Mm.
thing, you know, where the landmarks are in. It's definitely not the same as the thing that you're doing, which is like psychogeography, isn't it? Your like kind of layer of thinking. But this, even on itself, you know, some of the places that are on there aren't there anymore, or they've been turned into a pub, whereas it used to be like a shop or something like that. And I just love those moments in time that are captured, because they do represent that thing. And in the same way as needlework always provides a historical reference, whether it's the Bayeux Tapestry or the Great Tapestry of Scotland, or indeed the Game of Thrones Tapestry, different. You know, I love, because there's a real permanence and there's a real long lasting to these things. So again, and I'm just using the Bangalore one because I think that's probably the most, if you like, unlikely probably of the ones you had done. I would say, because, you know, in Ibiza, in the States, in Morocco, there's more, I was going to say urbanization. Maybe I'm being a bit prejudiced here or whatever, but, you know, I feel like Bangalore is such an interesting space to have explored and to got under the skin of. What happened to the map at the end?
Yeah, so most of the maps I've done, I still have, and so occasionally I exhibit them somewhere. But to be honest, I would actually love for each of these maps to live in the place.
Mm,
So actually, the last two I've done, I did one in Zurich this summer, and that now lives. It's part of the collection of the place I was working with, and then I was just in Morocco in a small town in March, and I've left the map with a micro museum, they call it,
right.
so that it can actually keep being participated on forever, like indefinitely.
Mm,
And I love that because, as I said, they can be infinite, of course, and I can't be there physically all the time, but people who visit the museum can keep building on it. So I'm really happy about that.
another question. You stitch the maps in the first place, is that right?
Right.
Can you talk about the process of that?
Usually it's first about finding a map. I often work with Google Maps, but there are some places where Google Maps doesn't really quite tell you the information, such as some of these Medinas in Morocco. They're so tightly, like it's such an organic, tight thing that you can't really see where the streets are. So I've had to work with different hand-drawn maps that exist, and then kind of put things together. But so I usually then print these large and trace them onto the fabric, and then I stitch them using either like a running stitch or back stitch, and each one takes maybe about 100 hours.
Wow.
And then I bring it to the place.
So the act of stitching that map gives you your geography of the place, right? You learn the streets, you learn how they're put together. How does that then marry up with when you get there? Because I think it's one thing to look at a map and it's another thing to walk through the streets of the place.
For sure. I mean, I still have to walk through the streets. But it's funny, I actually do call the running stitch my walking stitch, because first of all, I'm a slow stitcher anyway, but then I'm actually slowly walking the streets as I stitch them. And in a way, I may not be able to find my way around the city by doing that yet, but in a way, I'm kind of letting that particular pattern of that city kind of soak into my brain and into my hand, right? So, like there are very gridded cities like New York City, like Manhattan, and then the opposite are these organic Medinas of Morocco, for example. So each city has its own morphology, of course.
Yeah, and then do you find like that you'll be in a place and you'll be like, huh, and like maybe the layout of it is something that like triggers in the part of the back of your brain because you stitched that bit. Does that kind of happen?
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I realize, the map was a bit wrong also, this is not how it really is.
Yeah, I always get this thing as well because I've moved around a bit. Sometimes I feel sorry because our oldest daughter's going to be 7 on Monday, and the house we're in now is the 4th house that she's lived in. And I kind of explain to people that we're not criminals or in the army. It's just the way it's worked out or whatever. But whenever you move to a new place, I always think you sort of start from like, I don't know, almost like where you stand and where you look. And that's how you orient. You don't go which way is north and you orient off of that. But then sometimes when you put these pieces together, I find like sometimes your whole map can kind of shift in your head or suddenly because of like the directions that you take. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we each have, first of all, like a mental map of each place that we've been to or that we haven't been to. And then our mental map grows as we know a place more, right? This is why I started to do the project, is because I moved from the US to Barcelona. And so me being a foreigner, I'm like, I don't know any of these places. What do any of these places mean to the people who live here? So this was kind of the motivation in the beginning.
And how much then does your sense of a place change once you've mapped it with all these people? Does it change?
I mean, of course, it just comes to life, right? Because at first it's just like a two-dimensional thing, actually. And then every single place takes on a story or takes on this history. And it becomes multi-dimensional, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I love it. We went to Florence once and we did a food tour, and that was absolutely fantastic because it was one like another perspective on the town. Here are the nice places to find the food, and you get that sense of the narrative. But I love that idea that you might go on a street corner and you look over there and go, oh yeah, I know a guy who proposed to his his wife on the corner of that or something. I just wonder whether maybe you should do a selection of tourism guides just for people.
Yeah, telling people's personal stories. It would be funny. Yeah.
Just a little.
But you mentioned before psychogeography. That's something I'm really interested as well. And for those who haven't heard of it, it's like it's this concept that was talked about by the situationists. Have you heard of them?
I don't. They sound like they should be a band that came out in the 1980s and did a lot with synths.
Maybe they were also that. Yeah, but They were in the 60s. They were artists and activists based mostly out of Paris, but like all over Europe. Guy Debord was the kind of the main guy. He wrote a book called The Society of the Spectacle.
Right.
But they were really fascinated in exploring our environment in different ways. Like, for example, they were very inspired by this study that had come out. A guy mapped a girl's movements over a year. And so she went from her home to her school to her piano teacher's home and back home for an entire year. Like, she never left the triangle.
Right.
And they were like, this is just wrong. You know, what we need to do is actually get lost in our places and discover new places in our city, and not just get, you know, be in our same routine all the time. So they invented this concept of la dérive, the I think dérive in English, maybe, which is kind of like getting lost on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. And lots of games to like explore streets you've never been on and things like that. So I've been quite influenced by those people.
It makes me think of geocaching. Do you know geocaching?
Yeah, I think that's like a modern version.
Yeah, we went
Yeah,
on holiday to the island of Zakynthos, me and my wife, and used it there because people would put caches in places that you would never go to otherwise, but there would
right.
be spectacular views, or like and I think it's that same thing. It's that kind of layer because people go, I live here, and to me this is worth your attention, and so I'm going to put a cache here so that you can find it. And
Yeah.
I think, I mean, so yeah, I mean, I'm interested in this as a concept. So what's your take on psychogeography then? What does it mean to you?
I guess it's just about seeing all the different layers of a place. Like, it's very easy, even within our own lives, like just to, yeah, always take the same routes. And then also to see those same buildings or whatever in the same way, and not to think about who has lived there, what's happened. And so I guess my project for me is like one other, you know, it's another way to see behind all of these things.
There's an idea I like where if you go to London, for instance, you can get around London on the tube very efficiently, or you can go on the top deck of a bus and just look at the top half of all the buildings that you don't look at because you spend your time just walking down the middle of the street. It's that kind of idea, isn't it? It's just
Yeah,
reappraising the things that you're familiar with.
yeah, yeah. Shake it up.
Yeah. I'm also really, I always talk about as well, well, so I used to be a town councillor as well. And for a while I was the head of the planning committee. It was only like a parish,
Mm,
but we had a few different developments that were built on there. And so I got a bit of an idea about how this kind of works. And I always like desire lines, because like desire lines are the difference between the way someone has intended you to go and the way you end up going, you know? So when like someone's got like two paths that meet like that, but everyone just walks across the middle and wears a bit of grass out, and you're like, that's the way that you should have made it, you know? That kind of layer to me, I think that's kind of a
right.
psychogeography as well, right?
Totally. I'd never heard of the desire lines. Is the one that the people actually walk on the desire
Yeah.
line? Or,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And you can see
Cool.
them if you realize that they're there, you can sort of see them. Or if you walk across, if you go to a field and it's kind of overgrown, but you want to know the way people go, you can see it because the grass is just a bit flatter.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
in urban spaces, you see it a lot, like, you know, whether people are parking on verges or just, it's always that thing. It's always like there's a T
Mm,
junction in some paths, which made sense to the planners, but everyone's just cut the corner, done the
of
shortcut.
course.
And I wonder whether they're getting lost ideas, you know, because I guess we go with our own flow, right?
Sure, sure. But I mean, I think also, you know, sometimes when we're not in a hurry, we do this naturally too. Like, I'll maybe take how do you call it? A roundabout way, you know,
Mm,
a windy way home rather than the quickest way, right? And
mm,
that's where you kind of discover things more.
yeah. And I guess the slowness of it is trying to pull us up and make us just look at the world and appreciate it. I've said this about a million times as well. Then that's what needlework does, isn't it? Because it reframes sometimes an image in a context that you're not used to, but you're familiar with needlework. So, like for instance, Tanya Bukal is an artist who does a lot to do with migrants and refugees, and will cross-stitch detailed images of people who would otherwise be a flash on a news program. But because she's cross-stitched them, you go, and it makes you think about the whole thing differently because of the medium of it. And I feel like the same thing would happen with your maps then, because they're fabric and textiles. So rather than them just being a map like you are here, the simple fact that you've transformed yours into textiles probably makes people give them more attention.
Sure. I mean, I also use bed sheets like on purpose because everybody's familiar with the bed sheet and that, that intimacy of that. I mean, textiles are, they have so much meaning for us, whether we realize it or not, right? I'm obsessed right now with another podcast besides yours.
How dare you?
I know. You probably know it, Haptic and Hue.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm obsessed. You have to check it out. Her name is Jo Andrews, and she's a weaver, and she's rather than interviewing kind of textile artists like you, she is looking into the history of textiles and, all over the world and what textiles mean. I mean, it is mind blowing. Yesterday, I was listening to one, in fact, that needles predate textiles because people were sewing their skins.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So the needles predate swords, they predate textiles. So it's pretty cool, the history of the needle.
I can remember, I think I quoted it when I did a TEDx talk, like they found some needles at a site in Russia and they carbon dated them to being like 30,000 years or something. And you're just like, this is what twists my melon. Like I can distinctly remember I went to the Ashmolean Museum, I don't know, 12 years ago, something like that. And I was looking at like a piece of Chinese needlework from like 750 BC or something. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, this thing's massive, because it's rare, I think, to be involved in a medium that has got that lifespan and that cultural significance. It's bonkers.
It is. Yeah. Mind blowing.
And how do you feel about being a part of that?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's a lineage, right? It's a lineage from prehistoric times, let's say. I'm familiar, of course, with my more recent lineage, which is, I learned from my grandmother, as many people did. Many people have. My grandmother worked in a fabric store, which was just like a playground.
Yeah.
All the yummy fabrics. And she was a quilter. I'm from the US, so it's like these American style patchwork quilts. And the way they would do them was like a bunch of friends sitting around and working all on one quilt, right? And so I was quite inspired by that as well, even though I never got to see her doing that live. Right. But I sort of feel like my project is kind of just the inverse of that, because we're all sitting around one cloth, working on it together. But instead of it being your friends, it's a bunch of strangers.
But you're both telling stories, right? Because wasn't there something to do with like the Ibizan quilts and those kind of things? Like there would be tales woven into those quilts somehow, whether it's through pattern formation, that kind of thing. Like they would be able to tell tales.
Sure. I mean, the Ibizan ones are absolutely incredible. I don't know if my grandmother was kind of stitching stories in, but I do know that the kind of chatting with friends was a really important, like, just social moment between women to share stories about their lives. So I guess in an indirect way, that was happening while they were stitching these abstract patterns.
Yeah, they're all kind of community efforts, aren't they? And some are more deliberate, but for each of those people, like presumably your grandma's network of friends would all have a quilt that they'd all made together. So they've all got that like legacy from that moment.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, let's dive into this then. So you did fine arts and French literature.
I sure did. You've researched me very well.
What got you to that point? How did it all begin?
Yeah, so I mean, I used to be a painter, started out as a painter doing portraits mostly. And then I went to graduate school and I started, wow, just exploding in different directions with installation, with performance, with participatory things, strange installations with fruits and vegetables. I mean, all kinds of things. And
Can
then,
you just explain a strange installation with fruits and vegetables, please?
sure, yeah, I guess like my thesis show was all about this kind of about avocados and lemons and everything in between the natural avocado and lemon and an artificial one. So the whole spectrum. Like I
Come
said, it
on,
was
no, I
strange.
like this. Come on, no. Like, so for instance, just to explain, right, I worked out a long time ago that cake has an anti-gelling agent and that jelly has an anti-caking agent, which
Oh my
means that
God.
there's a spectrum of jelly and cake, right? And you're like, I don't like, so it feels to me like you're saying there's a spectrum that's got avocados on lemons on it.
Sure,
I need to
sure.
know. I need to know.
Well, I mean, there's a spectrum for me between like the natural and the fully not natural and you know,
Mm-hmm.
the artificial, the natural, and then like what are some of the things that we use now, like you know, grafted things and then cloned things and then genetically modified things, like they're all on a spectrum, right? So I had a lot of growing plants in my show. I had a lot of fruits. I had a lot of strange little dolls. Yeah, it was weird.
I love it. I love the sound of it.
But yeah, I would say a lot of that was inspired by this artist, and I don't know how to say his name, but he's quite famous, Rirkrit Tiravanija.
Okay.
Never actually heard his name spoken, so I don't know how to say it. But he was doing, and this was a while ago that I was doing my grad school, like 20 years ago maybe. So he was like, okay, I'm going to have a show in a museum in Berlin, and it's just making a pot of curry and all of us eating it. You know, this was the work that he was doing that was like mind blowing. So it's just about that life is art. And totally participatory. And so in a way that also influenced what I'm doing now, right? Just first of all, getting away from things like traditional mediums like paint or something. I guess that freed me from that, right? I was like, oh, I can use avocados, or I can use needlework, you know, in fine arts, let's say, right?
And do you, because what you're saying is like the maps, the people making the maps, and you don't have to overstate it, do you? But they're participating in an art project, and therefore they're applying their artisticness to it. That's right. But also then you're forsaking the end product. Like, it's not for you to say what the end product is going to be, and that's part of the art as well, isn't it? Is like with the curry, if everybody's making a curry, hopefully the curry's going to taste like a curry, but who's to say?
Sure.
And I guess,
yeah. There's a certain amount of letting go.
And so was that part of your MFA?
Yeah, that was the MFA, right?
Right. So then where did you, because you started doing this stuff around about 2004, I believe.
Right. So, you know, I got my MFA, then I taught for a couple of years in some schools in the US, and then I moved to Spain. So like I said, I moved to Barcelona and I started working with a couple of Colombian artists. Well, one was an architect, one was an artist. At that time in Barcelona, there was an incredible explosion of architecture and urban planning concepts everywhere going around. So I connected with a lot of architects at that time. I think the mapping is obviously quite connected to architecture, or at least architects love maps. So we had a connection there. That was Jimena Covaleda. And then the artist, she's one of my favorite artists, of all time. She now lives again in Medellin, in Colombia, but her name is Margarita Pineda. And when she was living in Barcelona, as many people do who are not from the country they're living in, she was working cleaning the airport.
Okay.
Right. So in her free time, she was doing art, but the most incredible art. And she was using also her life, her work at the airport to inform her art. So she took these huge, these huge fabric mops that they use at the airport that are like a meter wide, that they kind of just sweep the floor with. They become disgusting. And she collected all these and then embroidered with gold thread into them, like all the months, the days of the months and the weeks and days that she was working that job. Just a beautiful artwork, really.
Yeah. And at the same time, an infographic, right?
As well, a calendar, yeah. And so, with those two, we started doing these participatory mapping things in Barcelona.
And you said before about your grandma doing quilting being an early textile influence. Did you stitched as a child, or was stitching something you got into more latterly?
Yeah, so she taught me to sew, I would say, and then I didn't really do much of it for a few years. And then I kind of rediscovered it after I realized with my MFA that I could use any tool that I want to make my art. So, for me, it's something that I love to do, and it's also a tool that works really well for what I want to do.
Do you think with like fine arts, sometimes it's more acceptable to use a curry as an art form than it is to use a needle as an art form?
Interesting. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, maybe, because there is this stigma still, of course, against these so-called women's handicraft things, right? So in some ways, maybe you're right. Curry is
because it's like a
more
really
accepted.
avant-garde thing to do, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's like so left field that people will be like, well, that has to be art because I can't fathom why it's happening otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about it as well on your podcast, right? It's a lot of textile artists struggle with this, right? Like, I think one of your guests said, they wanted to work with the gallery, and it was like, they're like, oh, but we already have a needlework artist, so we can't have you too.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot, and it's an old one. It's even happened, like, I remember I was on telly in the UK a couple of times, and after that, people were like, oh, there's these different things you can do. But, like, when it comes to craft programs, there's a lady called Kirsty Allsop that does a show about craft, and they went, oh, but we've got Kirsty Allsop. Yeah, we have 150 cooking programs, and that seems to be fine. But with the crafting one, they go, no, we've got the crafting lady now. Do you know what I mean? As though, like, because overriding the fact that cooking is craft and gardening is craft and life is craft and paying attention to the world is craft, they were just like, yeah, no, we've got that. I was just like, what?
So true.
Really?
I mean, I think you've experienced it more than I have, just in the sense that you've connected to so many textile artists who have experienced that in one way or the other. So
I think it's one of the things I love about doing the podcast is having these conversations. And I'm not trying to steer the agenda, but a lot of themes come up again and again and again. And the challenge of like art versus craft, needlework as an art form, that thing's going to be perpetual, I think. I mean, it might change in the end, but like I say, I always find it funny that you can duct tape a banana to a wall and sell it for 100 grand, but someone cross stitches something that, takes 100 hours and they don't, people.
And that's not art. That's not art. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're so right.
Game playing, isn't it? It's a funny thing, that. Then one of the projects that you did, let me just find the information, was about wallpaper and tiles and bricks. And you were looking at buildings that had been somewhat deconstructed so that you could see the tiles and the walls. And it made me think of two things. One, it made me think of downstairs in my house, underneath the stairs, we've got some wallpaper from the 1930s, which is completely charming. And it's like a little memory of the past, which you don't see very often, but I love that kind of thing. And then I once helped build a straw bale house, and they like to have what are called truth windows, where you leave a little bit of the lime render off so that people can see that it's made of straw underneath. And seeing the pieces of work that you were doing, looking at that, made me think about like truth windows and stuff.
I'd never heard of a truth window, but I like the idea. I mean, yeah, all of that work was also in Barcelona with the bricks and everything. You know, that city is constantly under construction and deconstruction. And so and because of the construction of the buildings, there's only one wall in between each building. So that's why when they tear down one building, you see the wallpaper, the paint, various objects that have been left hanging on the wall of the building that's been torn down. You know, a toilet paper roll still stuck on the wall. An oven mitt 5 stories up that's still hanging on the wall. Yeah. So, but it's also about that finding these stories about a city, finding all the different layers of history and memories. Yeah.
I really love it. I just love the idea of being able to look at a building and you can just see, you know, you can let your own imagination run riot, but you can look at 12 different scenarios just presented to you without any other commentary. Once when I grew up in a town called Bedford, and we had a massive cinema. I think at one point it might have had like the biggest cinema screen in Bedford. It was like an old school, not biggest cinema screen in the UK. So it was an old school cinema that had like a row of seats in a circle, and they knocked it down. But when they knocked it down, the first kind of thing they did was take away the wall that had the screen. So you could walk past it and just see these rows of seats. It was amazing. It was like looking as though, you know, hi, I'm a cinema screen, and now I get to see all the seats there. It's just like some kind of amphitheater, something like that. Whatever. It was amazing. But I love those kind of things. I love because we've got little boxes and they all kind of look the same, and then everybody puts their personal spins on them. And I guess again, it's another form of psychogeography, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, different ways of seeing a place.
What's needlework like in the Spanish context?
That's a good question. To be honest, I haven't, at least in Ibiza, there's not a lot of needlework that's kind of still being practiced traditionally. There are a few very elderly women doing some lace with the bobbins. But, you know, I mean, any kind of embroidery has not really survived here. Not really. And in Barcelona, I also am not really familiar. Yeah.
Okay. What drew you to Spain?
It was just like, yeah, I just love living in Europe. So, and Barcelona, yeah, like I said, at that time was just an incredibly creative explosion. So that was really exciting.
And then Ibiza is a magical island that's run over by loads of ravers for about 6 months of the year. Is that right?
Nothing against ravers. I love ravers too.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, I also like electronic music, or else I would have gone crazy here years ago.
Right.
But yeah, Ibiza is like, to be honest, I just got tired a little bit of living so much in the city. Barcelona does not have a lot of green space, and Ibiza is a lot of nature, actually. So this is what is exciting for me here, as well as having a really international community as well. It's like living in the countryside, but having everyone super open-minded and from all the countries of the world.
Because I get, lots of people will go to Ibiza and they'll have their holidays and they'll have their experiences. But yeah, quite a few people remain, don't they? And I might be casting aspersions here. There are quite a lot of hippies in Ibiza.
There's quite a hippie population, and there has been since the 60s. There were a lot of draft dodgers that came from the US. That kind of started that movement here, and then
Yeah, I would like to go back there again, and now I know you're there. I'm totally bringing the
Yeah.
kids over. We're going to stay up at
Oh my
Liz's
God,
house.
let's come stitch together
That would be good. That would be good.
on the
I
beach.
had another question, which is probably a bit of a dry question, but I'm interested in it nonetheless. Presumably, when you do you call them, is it intervention art? Is that kind of how you phrase the pieces you do? Something like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have I call them interventions. Sure.
Yeah. When you do
hmm
those, then, is that something that you seek funding for to be able to go and do?
hmm Yeah, so it has depended, but in many of the places I have sought funding either through government, usually through government or some kind of art festival
Right.
or arts organization. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It's not like I make my living on doing the urban fabric, but I usually at least try to fund the flights, the accommodation, if I'm lucky, a bit of artist fee. But yeah.
And I just wondered, really, because you've been doing it quite a long time and evidently have done it quite successfully, I just wondered if you had any like top tips for anybody who might be thinking they'd like to do kind of public projects like that. Because I think it's one thing to like make your own stuff, try and sell it via social media, all those classic things, or try and get into shows and exhibitions. But what you're doing is different. It's that kind of like public art. It's a different mindset. And I just wondered what you could offer for people.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the country you're in and kind of how much support the government gives for things like that. And each place is totally different. Like Barcelona was a dream, and Ibiza is not a dream in
Right.
that aspect. So yeah, I think it really depends. I have a friend in Brazil who actually right now she's kind of using my urban fabric project as an inspiration to do something in her city there.
Right.
And she has received funding from the government, which I'm super happy for her about that. Yeah, and actually like that. It's kind of like, this is sort of a technique that I feel is really useful for people and can be really positive. So there's a few people I'm sort of consulting with, let's say, who I'm kind of helping them to design something like that where they are. And of course it will have their own flavor, and their own twist on it. But I think it's something that is beneficial to people.
Yeah, no, I always think it's a great project. And I think over here you find a lot of, like, say, for instance, the town I live in, Crewe, was a railway making town for the longest time. And railway industries come and go. So a lot of the spaces that used to be factories are now housing developments where new people are built over the top of them. But there's this whole like layer of history that's really important to a lot of the people who are now getting on quite a bit in their age. But capturing those stories and capturing that perspective on the town is something that I think is really important, and something that I don't think people do enough because we're all too busy, to take a proper snapshot or whatever. But that's where I've always loved your concept, because I think it gives people that opportunity in a way that's more meaningful. I kind of feel like it should just be mandatory.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think participatory mapping and things. You said you come a bit from the urban planning part of the government in a way, right?
Well, I've seen inside that. I understand a bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's becoming more popular, the participatory aspect, of not just building a bunch of things without asking the citizens what should be built and how and where, right? So it's becoming obvious and more popular to do participatory techniques. Now they're not usually using embroidery, right? But some kind of participatory technique to talk to people about what should happen.
Yeah, because I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Rather cynically over here, a lot of the housing estates that are built by the same 9 companies who, as far as I can tell, are using AI to maximize the number of houses it's possible to get inside a shoebox. But that becomes the motivation there, whereas actually we forget that it's humans that live in these things, and back in the day, towns would organically grow outwards, wouldn't they, as needs must. So I think, I think it's interesting, and perhaps it is something where if people are interested in their environment, maybe they should seek out or have conversations with like planning departments, or even like housing developers often have to have like public art, I think, as part of the deal, don't they? So maybe there's spaces in there that people could play with.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah.
Where are you going to be mapping next? Do you know?
Yes. So I'll be mapping here in Ibiza again. I actually have a massive project where I'll be doing, I mean, I hope it happens. Yeah, it's a project at its very beginning, but doing an 8 by 8 meter map stitched. Yeah, but it would be a project where I'm also collaborating with different people. I would love to use wool from the island, which is not really has not really been worked with. People just throw the wool away after they shear their sheep generally. I've gotten a bit into natural dyeing, so I think I would work with a natural dyer as well. Yeah, I'm kind of stretching into this. I've always worked with usually threads from the store, but now I'm starting to get interested in the natural dyes and the hand spun things. Or I haven't used any hand spun things yet, but I would like to.
Yeah, because actually then that grounds the project even further, isn't it? It's like you're making a piece of art from the island that you're mapping. It's like a holistic approach to it.
Right.
That does feel like very much the evolution, because like if you look on your Instagram, there's as much about mapping as there's you just exploring the environment and being part of the environment and finding your natural connections with it. And I guess this is an unfolding of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Right. I'm going to move on to the tough questions now.
Oh.
Yeah, let's do this. Do you have a favorite book?
Yeah, these are the hardest questions. It's true.
I love it.
I have a book which I have not read in many years, but I would say it's my favorite. It's in French. It's from Guadeloupe, and it's called Pluie et vent sur Telume Miracle, and it's just a story about a magical story about the struggles of a girl there growing up.
What's the title again?
For some reason, it really touched me. Pluie et vent sur Telume Miracle. So rain and wind on Telume Miracle. That was her name in the book.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah.
I was thinking at the moment I'm trying to read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I dip into it. This sounds daft, right? It's got a lot of words on the page, so I only do about 2 pages a night before I fall asleep. But you know, earlier you were saying about, what are you saying about that lady that came over and then became the richest person on the island?
In Fez.
Yeah, that's it. That sounds like the sort of thing that would happen in that book, because I was reading it like last night and 2 people nonchalantly died, you know, in extreme circumstances.
Yeah, completely surreal. Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Love it.
Magical realism, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I am enjoying it because it's just a sort of throwaway thing. It seems to. Have you read it? Do you know it?
I have, yeah. Many years ago, though.
Yeah, but it sort of bips a bit around the time. But then, and that within about 3 sentences, someone will have lived and died. But then we'll come back to them again later or something. It's just like, it's very entertaining. Okay, good. Book then. Music. Let's just talk about music. Favorite band or favorite album? That sort of thing.
Right. I don't have a favorite one.
No.
I like all kinds. Like I do love electronic music, as I mentioned, but I also love kind of really depressive music, like, I don't know, the Magnetic Fields, Yo La Tengo. Maybe these things kind of from the 90s.
Right.
I like Cat Power, but I also love salsa music. I love salsa dancing. So if I really need to get like pumped up, I put on something like that.
How much, I mean, do you indulge in your island's electronic situation much when it comes to dance music?
I do. Not so much going to the clubs anymore, although I did do that in my first years. But you know, everybody's I mean, I would say a quarter of my friends are DJs. That's just how it is here.
Mm, mm.
And so everybody, in their private house parties are, that's what's being played.
What kind of genres really float your boat there?
I'm not even like an expert. I used to be super into what was called minimal, but now I kind of like all kinds of things. I don't even know how you call them.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, I suppose. I listen to a thing called Mixcloud, and they kind of break the genres down a little bit. So I'm a bit more like, I know the difference between, say, minimal techno
Yeah.
or soulful house or whatever, But
Mm.
you might like. There's a DJ I really like who's called Colin Curtis, and he's been DJing for like 60 years. He was like involved in the northern soul scene over here, but at the moment, what he plays a lot of is jazz dance fusion music, which is very much that kind of Latino vibe, but then also has a kind of housey element to it or whatever. So I know if I really need to get some emailing done, then I'll be putting that on. Occasionally dancing in my office to myself there, thankfully.
Amazing.
I mean, is there like an album that you will turn to? Do you like any of the classic albums or any of those sorts of things?
I mean, I can't even ever remember names of albums, but I've had, many years I was super into Led Zeppelin. I had, I don't know, I'm super into Sufjan Stevens. I like his Illinois album a lot. All of his things, actually.
Has he just started coming back again or something? I feel like he might have a new album out for the first time in a long time. Or am I just imagining that?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, I've got a couple of his albums, and I sort of what happens is I hear about music and then I download it and then forget I've got it. And then the other day I put one of his albums on. I was just like, oh man, this is great. I need to think it like sometimes they're the right kind of things as well. Like his music, I think would actually be brilliant for listening to in the car when you're driving because it kind of goes on a journey and that. Like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Do you have a favorite film?
Also, not really. Not really a favorite film. I do like movies. I like that, but I don't know. I actually used to try to watch movies as I was embroidering in some of the really long stretches, but you just can't really watch anything. So I think that, the fact that podcasts were invented is amazing for people stitching because it's the only thing you can really do while you're stitching.
Yeah. I was going to ask whether you listen to music when you're stitching, but I guess you listen to podcasts then.
I listen to music and to podcasts. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And do you mix between them? Like if you've got a bit of a hard graft, if you're in that doldrums of like hours 70 to 80 or something.
I mean, yeah. Sometimes, like I said, you need to be like pumped up, like, ooh, like, let's do this. Or sometimes, you need a podcast where you get a little bit lost in the story to help you pass the time, right?
So come on then, let's go. Favorite podcast, NeedleXChange is a given. You don't have to say it any more than that, obviously. What's your number 2 podcast?
Right now it's Haptic and Hue, which I already told you about. I'm obsessed with her, and her voice is really nice as well. And then I really like the Huberman Lab podcast about science, like about trying to be healthy. It's kind of also like stitching is not the healthiest maybe hobby because it's a lot of sitting.
I think stitching and yoga need to be put together. I think that's the way to survive it, right?
Totally. You definitely need stretching and things. And like the Huberman guy, he said the other day, if you don't have time to go exercise, just like run up and down the stairs a couple times. So sometimes in the middle of embroidering, I'll just run down to the I live on the 7th floor, so I'll just run down and then run up and then just keep stitching.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea, isn't it?
And it makes me feel at least a little bit like I'm getting my blood moving. So
yeah. When I've done a couple of talks at the Royal School of Needlework to like the degree students, who a lot of them are sort of, degree students, so in their 20s or whatever. And I was always just saying to them, I was like, for God's sake, just stretch. I know you're young and you don't know that you need it, but I'm like, for the sake of your future self, just every 20 minutes, just look in the opposite direction to the one you've been looking at. All of that.
Totally. It's such good advice. And no one ever taught me anything like that. I mean, when I was in art school and I was painting all the time, I used to get horrible horrible back pains. And I would say even that's slightly why I stopped painting, because I just couldn't deal with the particular muscle pain that would come into my upper back. So, gosh, that's like a whole discipline, is like exercise for stitchers and for artists.
I might build an online course for it, charge 100 quid. Now, I remember someone once told me as well, there was like some neck exercises that you could do where you look left and right as far as you can, and you do that 10 times. Then you kind of tilt your ears upwards about 10 times, and then you have to look forwards and backwards. And I remember the first time I did it, and I did the tilt in my ear thing. I just done it now. Like, my neck was making all these cracking noises because it was like the first time I'd unlocked something. I was like, it's amazing.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
really good.
like rolling your head around, because we just don't do enough of that sort of stuff. I was just like, oh, that's really good.
Oh, that feels good. Thanks.
It's a shame this isn't going out on video now, isn't it? Right then. Okay, so the final question then. Can you tell me one interesting fact that not a lot of people know about Liz Kueneke?
Okay. I was thinking about it, and I'm not even sure what it could be, but there's like one thing that many people know, but many people who know me as a stitcher don't know.
Okay, I like
which,
it.
Which is that a whole other branch of my art is using artistic swimming as a tool rather than stitching.
Oh, okay. Let's go. Let's dive in. See what I did there. Let's dive into this.
Okay, yeah. So, COVID was happening. I was lucky enough to not be like working a job in the sense that I had a lot of hours in the day. I know some people had very hard times, but I had the luck to be able to get bored a bit. And I often find that's the biggest luxury as an artist, is to be able to get a little bit bored so you can create something new, to have a little bit of space, to create some space. So I started swimming, and because I used to do synchronized swimming when I was a teenager. So it's kind of a skill that has degraded over time, for sure, but it's there. It's kind of like riding a bike. And I started to make little videos and to try to connect with nature with this kind of dance, but while swimming. So I do a bit of that. Like next week, I'm in a show where I'll be swimming in the sea, and I've built a replica of a lighthouse, which I'll be basically swimming on my back with this lighthouse coming out of my torso. Just that.
Yeah. Fair play. If you can do it with a curry, I'm pretty sure you can do it with a lighthouse, is what we're discovering here, right?
That's the point. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, just like, can you tell me a bit about what's it like doing synchronized swimming? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful exercise for one. So actually, it's a great contrast to my stitching, right? In the sense that I'm moving my body a lot more. And what I'm doing is I'm not doing it in pools like is usually done. I'm doing it just in nature. So like here in Ibiza, I'm part of an art collective. We're 3 women, and 2 of us are swimming, and a friend of mine is designing incredible costumes, and the 3rd friend is filming us from above with a drone. So we're, the seas here are incredibly clear. Luckily, we still have, knock on wood, very clear water in Ibiza, and so you can see the bottom of the sea under us from above, right? It's absolutely gorgeous. And so it's swimming in the sea, it's different. You have waves and jellyfish and coldness and all kinds of different challenges to work with. But I just see it as another tool, like stitching is, or like making a curry is, or whatever it is.
And the funny thing is, in the same way as you can take a map to Morocco and the community are the participants in that and shape the direction of it, your swimming project, I guess the sea is the participant and somewhat shapes the direction of it as well, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you have to work with her, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I know. I've seen some of the images on your Instagram of that, and I'm both amazed by the beauty and deeply, deeply jealous. Just going to come out and say it now. Has to be that way. It looks absolutely lush, and there's some really lovely photos that you've done. I think of like from underneath the water, but the light coming through the water, and it's almost like some kind of marbling abstract effect. The way it's like playing and the angles that you choose to make some really interesting, like abstract imagery that people are like would be familiar with, but wouldn't be familiar with.
Well, so now when you come to Ibiza, we'll go swimming in the sea together. That's what we'll do.
Very good. You know, I'll have potentially a 8-year-old and a 6-year-old with me, so it won't be as
That's
relaxed.
perfect.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm gonna have a chat with my wife because we've been to Ibiza before. I'm gonna be like, right, we're in here.
Now's the
Bring
time.
girls.
Yeah.
That'd be amazing. Hey, Liz, thanks for having a needle exchange with me.
Thank you so much. What a fun chat. And finally, I get to meet you.
Finally, at
Finally.
last, a meeting of titans. Happy days. Happy days. Awesome.
Thank you so much.